The stars stretched endlessly outside the window of Jax's ship, bright dots scattered across the black sea of space. Marcus sat in the co-pilot's chair, his eyes scanning the radar for any sign of pursuit. He had been in many battles before, but something about this felt different. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about protecting Seraphil. He glanced behind him and saw her sitting quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze lost in thought. She looked calm on the outside, but Marcus could see the weight pressing on her. She was no longer hiding from him. He knew she was a princess, and she knew the hunters would not stop until they had her. But still, she sat with her head high, shoulders straight, as though the dignity of her bloodline refused to let her break. Jax walked into the cockpit, chewing on something. "You've brought me trouble, Marcus," he muttered, shaking his head. "Hunters, soldiers, and whispers about a lost princess. Do you know what that means?" Marcus didn't flinch. "It means we're running out of time." Jax leaned closer, lowering his voice. "It means you're carrying a fortune on this ship. Do you know what people would pay for her?" His eyes flicked toward Seraphil. Marcus's hand tightened around the armrest, his body tense. "She's not for sale." Jax smirked but said nothing more. He returned to the controls, but Marcus didn't miss the way he looked at Seraphil. Distrust stirred in his chest. He knew Jax was helping them now, but mercenaries had their own loyalties, and most of those loyalties could be bought with enough money. Hours passed in uneasy silence. Finally, Seraphil broke it. "Where are we going?" Marcus turned to her. "Somewhere safe. Away from the colonies, away from hunters." She shook her head slowly. "There is no safe place for me, Marcus. Not while my enemies rule. Not while they sit on the throne that is mine." The words hung heavy in the air. Jax glanced at her in surprise. "So it's true then? You're really her?" Seraphil met his gaze calmly. "Yes, and if you think of selling me, know this. The ones who want me dead will kill you too. No one wins." Her words cut through the cockpit like a blade. Jax chuckled nervously, holding up his hands. "I didn't say anything. Just making sure the story matches the face." Marcus watched her closely. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was starting to sound like a leader, like the princess she truly was. Later, when Jax left the cockpit again, Marcus sat beside Seraphil. "What did you mean back there?" "About the throne." Her eyes softened, but there was steel in her voice. "My father was betrayed. My family slaughtered. I was spared only because they wanted to humiliate us, to sell me like cattle. But I am still alive. And as long as I live, their claim to the throne is not complete. If I return, I can rally my people. I can take back what was stolen." Marcus exhaled slowly. It was the first time she had spoken openly about her destiny. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was preparing to fight back. "Then we'll get you back," he said simply. Her eyes widened, as though she hadn't expected him to agree so quickly. "Marcus, this is not your battle. You could walk away now and no one would fault you." He shook his head firmly. "I made a choice, remember? I told you I'd protect you. That hasn't changed. And if that means helping you reclaim your throne, then so be it." For a long moment she just stared at him, her eyes glistening as if holding back tears. Then she whispered, "You are a strange man, Marcus. Strange, but honorable." The next days were spent in planning. Seraphil told Marcus about her homeworld, Aloria, about the allies who might still remain loyal, and about the wealth hidden away in vaults only she could access. Marcus listened carefully, mapping out their next moves. It was no longer just about staying alive, it was about striking back, but danger found them before they were ready. A warning alarm blared through the ship. Marcus leapt to the controls, scanning the radar. "We've got company," he shouted. 2 ships appeared out of hyperspace, sleek hunters with weapons glowing. They fired immediately, the blast shaking Jax's ship. "Hold on," Jax yelled, jerking the controls. The ship spun violently, dodging fire. Seraphil grabbed the seat, her knuckles white. Marcus fired back with the ship's cannons, his soldier instincts sharp. But the hunters were fast, and Jax's ship wasn't built for war. A blast struck the rear, alarm screaming as systems flickered. "They'll tear us apart," Jax shouted. Seraphil suddenly stood, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Take me to the comms." Marcus turned in shock. "What are you doing?" "Trust me," she said firmly. He followed her to the communication system. She pressed her hand against the console, speaking in her native tongue. Her voice was commanding, echoing with strange power. For a moment nothing happened. Then the hunter slowed. On the screen, the face of one of the pilots appeared. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Princess?" Seraphel lifted her chin. "Yes, I live." "If you have honor, stand down. Serve your true queen or face the shame of betraying your blood." The pilot hesitated, torn between duty and fear. Then slowly he lowered his weapon systems. The other ship followed. Marcus stared in disbelief. She hadn't just survived the attack, she had turned it into loyalty. Even in exile, her presence commanded respect. The hunters escorted them safely to a hidden world, one of the last loyal outposts of her people. There, Seraphel was greeted not as a slave, but as a queen returned. The people bowed, tears in their eyes, their hope reborn at the sight of her. Marcus stood at her side, watching. She looked radiant, her rags replaced with royal garments given to her by her people. For the first time, he saw her not just as the girl he had protected, but as the ruler she was meant to be. But when she turned to him, her eyes softened. "You stayed when you didn't have to. You saw me when I was nothing, and you treated me with respect. That is why I trust you more than anyone." Marcus felt something stir in his chest. He wasn't a prince, wasn't a noble, wasn't even wealthy, but somehow he had become the most important person to her. In the days that followed, Seraphel began to gather her strength, preparing for the war to reclaim her throne. Armies whispered her name again, and allies returned to her side. And through it all, Marcus remained beside her, not as a servant, not as a bodyguard, but as a partner. What began as a cruel joke, the gift of a so-called slave, had turned into destiny. Marcus had been handed not a burden, but a princess. A woman with wealth beyond imagination, with power that could shape worlds. But to him, she wasn't just a princess. She was Seraphel, the girl who had smiled through pain, who had trusted him when no one else would, who had given him a reason to fight again. As they stood together, looking out at the stars and the worlds waiting to be reclaimed, Marcus knew one truth above all. He hadn't accepted her as payment. He had accepted her as his future. And Seraphel, once a lost princess, knew that with Marcus by her side, she could face anything. The morning after the scavenger attack was quiet, but Marcus could feel a change in the air. The fire had burned down to ashes, and Seraphel sat close to it, her face serious. She didn't look afraid anymore. Instead, there was something else in her eyes. Determination. Marcus had seen that look before in soldiers, the ones who refused to give up even when everything was against them. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of the wind brushing against the rocks. Finally, Marcus said, "They'll be back." Seraphel nodded slowly. "Yes, they know now. And others will learn too." Her voice was calm, but Marcus knew what she meant. The secret of who she was wouldn't stay hidden for long. If word spread that the lost princess of Aloria was alive, powerful enemies would come after her. Not just scavengers, but soldiers, bounty hunters, even entire armies. Marcus clenched his fists. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even wealthy or important. But looking at Seraphel, he felt the weight of a choice. He could walk away now, leave her to her fate, or he could stand with her. He thought about the way she had been given to him like trash, the way she had survived all that pain and still carried herself with dignity. He already knew his answer. "I'll protect you," he said firmly. Seraphel turned her head to look at him. For a moment she didn't say anything, but then her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Even if it costs you your life?" Marcus held her gaze. Especially then. The words settled between them like a promise. From that day, their journey changed. No longer were they just hiding in the ruins. Marcus began to train Seraphel in the ways of survival, showing her how to fight with knives, how to aim a blaster, how to move quietly through shadows. At first, she struggled. Her hands shook, her strikes were clumsy, and she often grew frustrated. But Marcus never lost patience. "You don't need to be perfect," he told her. "You just need to be ready." And slowly she grew stronger. Her strikes became sharper, her aim more steady. She was quick to learn, her royal mind adapting faster than Marcus expected. He realized that beneath her soft exterior was a fierce will. She wasn't just a princess waiting to be saved. She was becoming a warrior beside him. But training wasn't enough. They needed allies, and Marcus knew where to find some. He took Seraphel to an old outpost deep in the desert, a place where smugglers and mercenaries gathered. It was dangerous, but Marcus had contacts there, people who owed him favors. As they entered the outpost, Seraphel pulled her hood low to hide her face. The air inside was thick with smoke and noise, men and women shouting, bargaining, fighting. Marcus kept her close, his hand never far from his weapon. They met an old friend of his, a pilot named Jax. He was rough, with a scar across his cheek and a laugh that sounded more like a growl. When he saw Marcus, he slapped him on the back. Still alive, eh? And who's this? Jax's eyes flicked to Seraphel, sharp with curiosity. A friend, Marcus said quickly. We need passage off-world, quietly. Jax raised an eyebrow. Quiet costs extra. Marcus leaned in close. I'll owe you. Jax studied him for a moment, then let out a low chuckle. You already owe me more than you can pay, but fine. For old times. They arranged for a ship to take them off the planet, but even as Marcus made the deal, he noticed Seraphel's hands tighten at her sides. When they were alone again, she whispered, I do not trust him. Marcus sighed. Neither do I. But we don't have a choice. That night, as they waited for Jax's signal, Marcus and Seraphel sat in the quiet corner of the outpost. She leaned closer to him, her voice barely a breath. Why do you do this? She asked. You owe me nothing. Yet you risk your life. Marcus thought for a moment. Because when I look at you, I don't see a slave or a princess. I see someone who deserves better. Someone who shouldn't be left behind. Her eyes softened, and for the first time Marcus saw her walls begin to crack. She wasn't just the strong, hidden royal. She was also a woman who had lost everything and was still learning how to trust. But their moment didn't last. Shouts echoed across the outpost. Armed men stormed in, their eyes scanning the crowd. Marcus recognized them immediately. Bounty hunters. Word had spread faster than he feared. Go. Marcus grabbed Seraphel's hand, pulling her through the chaos. Blaster fire lit up the room, people screamed, and smoke filled the air. They ducked behind crates, moving as fast as they could. Seraphel's hood slipped off, and for a moment one of the hunters saw her face. His eyes widened, and he shouted, It's her! The princess! Panic surged through Marcus. The secret was out. They fought their way through the hunters, Marcus firing while Seraphel stayed close. She was terrified, but she didn't freeze. She remembered his training, using a fallen blaster to defend herself. Side by side, they pushed through the storm of violence until they reached the hangar where Jax's ship waited. Jax was already inside, engines humming. Get in! He shouted. They scrambled aboard just as more hunters burst into the hangar. The ship lifted off, fire raining down around them. Marcus pulled Seraphel into the seat beside him, his chest heaving, his heart pounding. For a long time, neither spoke. The ship rattled as it broke through the atmosphere, and finally, silence returned. Seraphel turned to Marcus, her eyes wide but steady. They know now, she whispered. Marcus nodded grimly. Then we stay ahead of them. She held his gaze. This is not your fight, Marcus. It is mine. He shook his head. Not anymore. It's ours. Her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to argue, but then she closed them again. Instead, she leaned back, her eyes never leaving him. For the first time since they had met, she allowed herself to feel safe, not because she was a princess with power, but because she was with someone who refused to leave her side. And Marcus knew the truth. The joke played on him had turned into something far greater. The enemies who thought they had humiliated him had instead given him purpose. He wasn't just protecting a runaway slave. He was standing beside a princess who had the power to change everything. And together they were only just beginning their fight. Marcus woke before the sun rose, his body stiff from sleeping on the hard ground. The nights outside the colony were cold, but at least here, in the rocky outskirts, he didn't have to worry about curious eyes or greedy men whispering about Seraphina. He glanced over at her. She was sitting on a flat stone, her back straight, her eyes closed as though she were listening to something far away. He watched her for a moment. Even in silence, there was something about her that felt different, like she was carrying a weight he could not see. When she finally opened her eyes, there was a sadness in them, but also a quiet strength. Did you sleep? He asked. Not much, she said softly. Dreams. They do not let me rest. Marcus wanted to ask what kind of dreams, but he didn't. He could see she wasn't ready to share more. So instead, he started preparing a small fire. As the flames crackled, Seraphina sat closer to the warmth. For a brief moment, she looked like any ordinary girl, her face lit by the soft glow. But Marcus knew she wasn't ordinary. Everything about her told him she was something more. The days passed slowly. Marcus and Seraphina lived simply. surviving on supplies he had carried with him and the small animals he hunted. Serafina began helping him more, gathering water, fixing tools, even learning how to set traps. At first, Marcus thought she was just trying to be useful, but then he realized she was learning fast, faster than most humans. She seemed to have a mind that absorbed everything. One afternoon, as Marcus was repairing an old communicator, Serafina leaned closer. "You are connecting the wires wrong," she said softly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really? And how do you know that?" She hesitated, her fingers twitching as if she wanted to show him. Finally, she reached out and adjusted the wires with precision. The communicator sparked, then hummed to life. Marcus stared at her. "How did you—" Serafina quickly pulled her hand back. "I only remembered," she said almost nervously. Remembered. The word echoed in Marcus's mind. She wasn't supposed to know about human technology, yet she did. He didn't push her for answers, but the puzzle in his head grew larger. Who was this girl, really? That night, as the stars shone bright above them, Marcus couldn't hold back his thoughts. "You've been hiding something from me," he said quietly. Serafina froze, her eyes wide. "What do you mean?" "You're not just some slave, Serafina," Marcus continued, his voice calm but firm. "The way you talk, the way you act, the way you fix things, you've lived a life different from what you told me." For a long moment she said nothing. Then slowly her eyes dropped to the ground. Her hands tightened around the cloth of her dress. "I cannot tell you everything," she whispered. "If I do, it will put you in danger." Marcus leaned forward. "I can handle danger, but I need to know who you are. If I'm going to keep protecting you, I need the truth." Her eyes filled with conflict. She looked at him, searching his face for something, trust maybe, or strength. Finally, she let out a long breath. "My name is not truly Serafina," she said. "It is only the name they gave me when they took me away. My real name is Serafel, and I am—" She paused, her voice trembling. "I am not a slave. I am a princess." The words hung in the air like a heavy stone. Marcus blinked, trying to take them in. "A princess?" he repeated. She nodded. "From the house of Aloria. My family rules many worlds across the stars. I was taken during a betrayal. Enemies sold me as if I were nothing." Her voice cracked, but she steadied herself. "And then I was given to you as a joke." Marcus felt his chest tighten. He thought back to the moment the alien warlords had handed her to him, laughing. They had known. They knew she was someone important, and they thought it would be amusing to see her given to a human with nothing. But now, the truth was out. The quiet girl who sat across from him wasn't just a survivor. She was the heir to unimaginable wealth and power. He didn't know what to say. Finally, he managed, "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "Because you would not have believed me," Serafel said softly. "No one does. And if the wrong people heard, they would come for me and kill you." Marcus studied her face. There was no lie in her eyes, only fear and exhaustion. He believed her. "You're right," he said finally. "I probably wouldn't have believed you, but now I do." For the first time, Serafel's shoulders relaxed. She looked at him with something like relief. In the days that followed, Marcus began to see her differently, not because she was a princess, but because of the way she carried the truth. She didn't demand respect or act superior. Instead, she worked beside him as if she were just another survivor. But Marcus couldn't forget her words. He couldn't forget that she had a home out there somewhere, and that home was waiting for her. And then, strange things began to happen. One evening, as they were walking through the ruins, a group of scavengers appeared, rough men with weapons, eyes filled with greed. They circled Marcus and Serafel, their leader, grinning. Well, what do we have here? A runaway slave and her master?" The man sneered. "She's worth a fortune. Hand her over." Marcus tightened his grip on his weapon. "She's not going anywhere with you." The scavengers laughed. But before they could attack, something unexpected happened. Serafel stepped forward, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She spoke in a language Marcus didn't understand, her voice commanding, powerful. The scavengers froze. For a moment, their faces twisted in confusion, then in fear. One by one, they backed away, muttering before turning and fleeing into the night. Marcus stared at her, stunned. "What did you just do?" Serafel looked down, almost ashamed. "It is a gift of my bloodline, a power that makes others obey. It only works on weak minds, but it was enough." Marcus shook his head, still in disbelief. "You really are who you say you are." She looked at him, her eyes shining. Now you see why I could not tell you before. For Marcus, everything had changed. He had accepted her as payment, thinking she was a burden, but now he knew the truth. She was a princess with wealth, power, and secrets beyond his imagination. And for reasons he didn't fully understand, she trusted him. As they sat together by the fire that night, Marcus looked at her and realized something. His life had been empty before, just mission, survival, and loneliness. But now, with Seraphel by his side, he felt a purpose greater than himself. What had started as a cruel joke by others was becoming something real, and deep inside, Marcus knew this was only the beginning. Marcus woke early the next morning, the thin rays of sunlight slipping through the cracks of the metal roof above him. His small shelter was barely enough for one person, but now two shared the space. He turned his head and saw Seraphina sitting in the same corner where she had rested the night before. Her posture was still upright, her eyes wide awake. It looked as though she hadn't slept much, if at all. He tried to break the silence. "You should rest. No one is coming here to hurt you." Seraphina's gaze flickered toward him, then quickly away. She said nothing, but Marcus could tell she didn't believe him. She had been a slave, pushed around, mistreated, and given away like an object. Trust didn't come easily for someone like her. Marcus decided not to push her. Instead, he prepared a simple breakfast: bread, dried meat, and water. When he placed the food in front of her, she hesitated before slowly taking a piece. He noticed the way she ate, polite, measured, almost trained. There was no greed in her, no rush, only quiet dignity. Even in rags and bruises, she carried herself like someone who once knew respect. For the first few days, their life together was quiet. Marcus worked on repairing machines while Seraphina sat nearby watching. She rarely spoke, but he could feel her observing everything: the tools, the way he fixed things, even the way he walked. She was learning him silently, as if trying to understand what kind of man he was. One evening, as Marcus was repairing an old engine, he heard a soft voice. It startled him because Seraphina had been silent for so long. "You are different," she said, her words slow, her accent heavy. Marcus looked up at her. "Different how?" "You do not treat me like the others did," she replied quietly. Her eyes held a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Marcus set down his tools. "Because you're not a thing, Seraphina. You're not a slave here. You're free." Her lips trembled as if she wanted to say something but stopped. Instead, she lowered her head as though the idea of freedom was too heavy to accept. Marcus could see it. Years of chains had built walls in her mind. Even though she no longer wore cuffs, she was still trapped inside her own fear. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Seraphina began to change. She started helping Marcus with his work, handing him tools, watching carefully, and then copying what he did. At first, he thought she was just trying to be useful, but soon he realized she was skilled. She understood machines faster than most people he had trained. Sometimes she even corrected him, pointing out small mistakes he hadn't noticed. "You've done this before," Marcus said one afternoon, wiping sweat from his forehead. Seraphina froze, then shook her head quickly. "No, and I only watch." But Marcus wasn't convinced. He could see it in her hands, the way they moved with confidence when handling wires and gears. There was more to her story, something she wasn't ready to share. He didn't press her, but his curiosity grew. One night, when the air outside was heavy with dust and the stars glowed faintly above, Seraphina spoke again. Her voice was soft, almost like a confession. "I was not always a slave," she whispered. "Before, I had a family, a home." Marcus turned toward her, listening carefully. She didn't give many details, but her words carried weight. She spoke of a palace far away, of halls made of shining stone, of gardens filled with strange flowers that glowed in the dark. For a brief moment, her eyes lit up with memory, but then the light faded, replaced by pain. "They took everything," she said, her voice trembling. "They took me." Marcus didn't ask who they were, but he could see the truth. Seraphina was not ordinary. She was someone who had lived a life of privilege, maybe even royalty, before being dragged into slavery. He wanted to comfort her, but he didn't know how. So he simply said, "You're safe now. With me, no one will hurt you." Those words seemed to touch something inside her. For the first time since she had come into his life, Seraphina allowed herself a small, fragile smile. But their fragile peace did not last long. Word had spread around the colony that Marcus had taken in a slave girl. Some people mocked him. saying he was foolish for treating her kindly. Others whispered darker things, curious about who she really was. One night, Marcus heard voices outside his shelter, men laughing and talking about how much they could sell the alien girl for. His heart tightened. He quietly locked the door and moved closer to Serafina. She was awake, her eyes wide with fear. "They won't touch you," Marcus said firmly, his hand gripping the metal rod he kept for defense. The voices eventually faded, but the danger remained. Marcus realized that keeping her safe would not be easy. He had nothing, no army, no wealth, no power, but he had his determination, and that was something he wouldn't let go of. The next day, Marcus decided to take Serafina outside the colony for a while, away from curious eyes. They traveled into the rocky outskirts where broken starships and old ruins lay scattered like the bones of forgotten times. Serafina seemed more at ease there, away from people. She touched the ruins gently as if they reminded her of something from her past. "This place, it feels familiar," she murmured. Marcus watched her, realizing that she was slowly opening up. She wasn't just a girl struggling to survive. She was someone with a hidden story, a secret identity, and though he didn't yet know the full truth, he knew one thing clearly. His life had changed the moment she walked into it. What started as an unwanted payment was turning into something deeper. Serafina was not a burden. She was becoming the center of his world, and he would protect her at any cost. And though Marcus did not yet understand her full worth, both in spirit and in wealth, he felt it in his heart. She was far more than what she appeared to be. Marcus was an ordinary man trying to survive in a world that never gave him much. He lived on the far edges of an intergalactic colony, where humans and aliens often crossed paths for trade, work, or sometimes trouble. He had no riches, no high status, no family waiting for him. His life was simple but hard. Every day, he repaired broken machines, fixed old starships, or traded whatever scraps he could find for food. Sometimes he went to sleep hungry, sometimes with just a piece of stale bread and water, but he kept going because giving up was not in his nature. On one particular day, Marcus was working near a docking station where different ships came and went. The place was noisy, filled with smoke from engines, voices of traders haggling, and the occasional shouts of guards trying to keep peace. Marcus had just finished repairing a broken generator for a small merchant. This merchant was not human, but a strange creature with scaled skin and bright yellow eyes. Marcus had seen him around before, a man always looking nervous as if someone was chasing him. That afternoon, Marcus noticed the merchant being harassed by a group of thugs. They were bigger, stronger, and clearly not afraid to use force. They accused him of not paying his debts and threatened to take his ship. The merchant pleaded, saying he had no money. Marcus, though he had no real reason to step in, felt a sense of fairness inside him. He couldn't watch the scene without doing something. So he stepped forward, using his knowledge of machines and a few tricks he had up his sleeve to cause a distraction. Sparks flew, alarms blared, and in the chaos, Marcus managed to give the merchant enough time to slip away from the gang. Later that evening, the merchant came to Marcus, still shaken but grateful. He said Marcus had saved his life and he wanted to repay him. Marcus expected a few credits or maybe supplies, something small that would at least make his next week easier. Instead, the merchant returned with something shocking. Behind him was a young alien woman, her hands bound by metal cuffs, her eyes lowered to the ground. She was thin, her clothes torn, and her back carried the quiet weight of suffering. Marcus froze. "What is this?" he asked in disbelief. The merchant, looking proud of his decision, said, "Payment. She is yours now, a slave." Marcus felt disgust rise inside him. He had seen the way some traders dealt with slaves, beings treated like objects, stripped of dignity, sold and bought as if their lives had no meaning. He never agreed with it. To him, every living being deserved freedom no matter what world they came from. "I don't want her," Marcus said sharply. "I don't own people," but the merchant shook his head. "She is no use to me. If I leave her here, others will take her and her fate will be worse. You saved me today. This is all I can give you." His voice was desperate, and before Marcus could argue further, the merchant shoved the girl forward and disappeared into the crowd, vanishing like smoke. Marcus stood there, the alien girl in front of him, silent, still in chains. He didn't know what to do. People passing by threw him curious glances, some smirking, some whispering. To them it was nothing strange. To him it felt wrong, but he could not just leave her standing there. So, with a heavy sigh, he took her back to his small shelter near the edge of the colony. When they arrived, he gently removed the cuffs from her wrists. The skin beneath was bruised, marked with the pain of captivity. She didn't flinch, didn't speak, only sat quietly as if waiting for orders. "You're free now," Marcus said softly, handing her some food and water. She looked at him with cautious eyes, as if trying to judge whether he was telling the truth. Slowly, she took the cup of water and drank. Her name, he later learned, was Serafina. She spoke little, but there was something in the way she carried herself that felt different. Even in her silence, she seemed proud, as though the chains had never touched her spirit. Marcus noticed small things. How she held her back straight, how her gaze lingered on objects with intelligence, how her movements, though tired, were graceful. She was not like the broken souls he had sometimes seen among slaves. She had a strength hidden beneath her calmness. For the next few days, Marcus let her stay. He didn't ask questions, didn't treat her like a servant. He gave her space, food, and a blanket to sleep on. She didn't smile, but slowly he noticed her guard lowering. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't watching, she would study the tools in his workshop with curious eyes, as if she understood more than she let on. Marcus often wondered why fate had put her in his path. He didn't believe in destiny, but something about this felt unusual. He had wanted nothing more than a simple life, yet here he was with a mysterious alien girl in his care. He didn't know her past, didn't know why she had ended up in chains, but he knew one thing clearly: he would not let anyone harm her again. As the nights grew colder and the colony lights flickered in the distance, Marcus began to feel a strange responsibility toward her. It wasn't about ownership or payment anymore. It was about humanity. His, and perhaps hers too. He still remembered the moment the merchant shoved her into his life. At first it had felt like a curse, but as he watched Serafina sitting quietly by the firelight, her eyes reflecting the glow with a mysterious depth, Marcus had the sense that this was not an accident. Something greater was at play, though he couldn't yet see what. The story of their journey had only just begun, but already, Marcus's world was no longer the same.